All right, so, sometimes you're just kind of scrolling through the news and then bam, something makes you stop and go, hold on a sec, what was that? That's totally me with this CNN thing you sent over.
Mhm.
Anderson Cooper, like, actually going at it with some guy defending Trump. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's got to be good. So basically, we've got this segment. Cooper's going head to head with this former California LT Gov. What's his name again? Abel Maldonado, right?
Yeah.
And Maldonado's defending these comments Trump made about the military and the Democrats. Basically, Trump's suggesting the military should, handle the Democrats. Which, I mean, come on, that's not exactly subtle, is it? No, not really. So, of course, everyone's freaking out. Maldonado jumps in to, like, defend Trump,
Mhm.
saying, oh, he's just a fighter. It's that New York attitude,
Yeah.
trying to play it off like it's no big deal. But Cooper's not having it. He brings up that comment from General Mark Milley, Trump's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Well, yeah, right?
Milley straight up called Trump a fascist to his core.
And that's really important to remember here. It's not just some commentator saying that. This is Milley, a seasoned military leader, someone who really understands authoritarianism and what makes it dangerous. So his words carry a lot of weight in this situation.
For sure. For sure. And the way Maldonado responds to that is really interesting, too. He basically tries to discredit Milley, saying that critics only ever speak out after they've had a falling out with Trump. Like they're just bitter ex-employees or something.
It's wild how often that happens, right? Like they completely dodge the actual criticism itself, just trying to discredit the person saying it without actually addressing the content of what they're saying.
Right. Like we shouldn't listen to these people even though they were literally there just because they dared to disagree with Trump.
Exactly. And it just shows you how common these personal attacks are in politics today. Like we'd rather just tear someone down instead of having an actual debate based on, you know, facts and logic.
Ugh. It's so true. And it's extra worrying here because we're talking about potential threats to democracy. Like this isn't just some abstract political debate. This is serious stuff. But anyway, Cooper's not letting Maldonado get away with it. He basically says that military leaders joined administrations to be a check on power, to try and stop potentially dangerous policies, that they're there to serve the Constitution, not just the president.
Which is exactly the point. This
Yeah.
isn't just about disagreeing on policy. It's about what role the military should even have in a democracy. Are they a tool for the leader to use, or are they supposed to uphold something bigger than any one person?
So important. But anyway, the whole thing kind of devolves from there. It turns into this back and forth about whether or not you can call Trump a fascist. Like literally whether you can use that word to describe him. Maldonado keeps saying, no, Trump's not a fascist. But when Cooper presses him on whether Trump says, fascistic things, Maldonado really starts to stumble.
It's almost like he wants to have it both ways, right? Like distance Trump from this really loaded word, but at the same time not actually condemn anything Trump has said, or even acknowledge that his words sound kind of fascisty.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting for me. Like, remember how Maldonado kept using that New Yorker defense?
Yeah.
Like it was some kind of excuse for this stuff?
Yeah, like 8 million people all act the same.
Exactly. And Cooper thankfully calls him out on that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like a classic tactic, right? Use these huge generalizations so you don't have to actually address the criticism.
And it's just so obvious in this case because Cooper brings up the Central Park Five.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's the perfect example. Like, trying to say Trump is this tough, but fair New Yorker, when everyone remembers what he did during that case.
I mean, this was Trump taking out full-page ads demanding those kids get the death penalty before they'd even had a trial.
Seriously, it
Yeah.
shows how dangerous stereotypes are, especially when you use them to excuse prejudice.
Yeah, and you could practically see Maldonado panicking at that point.
Right.
Kept saying these vague things about New Yorkers being fighters and strong. But after that Central Park 5 example, it just sounded hollow.
Of course. It's pretty hard to defend generalizations when you're faced with actual examples that prove you wrong.
It's just so frustrating.
Yeah.
And honestly kind of disheartening.
How so?
Because it just feels like this is what politics is now. Less about actual arguments and more about scoring points.
Yeah.
Defending your side no matter what.
Totally. Like there's no curiosity or willingness to actually listen to the other side.
And nowhere is that more obvious than the end of this whole thing. Cooper tries to get Maldonado to admit, like, anything, any wrongdoing on Trump's part at all. But Maldonado just deflects.
How does he do that?
He just changes the subject. Starts talking about what he sees as Trump's successes.
Yeah.
Like lowering inflation and all that.
The classic pivot.
Right. It's like, look over here, shiny objects.
And it works, unfortunately. By talking about something completely different, it means you don't have to answer for the original problem.
It's just frustrating. But I guess you're right. It's everywhere.
Just reminds us to be careful about what we read and hear, especially in these political debates.
Absolutely. Can't just take everything at face value. Have to think critically and ask ourselves who benefits from saying these things.
Exactly.
You know what else got to me about all this? These labels we throw around.
Yeah,
Like fascist. Such a loaded word.
for sure.
But what does it even really mean? Are we using these words because we've thought about them? Or just to shut down the conversation?
It's dangerous, right? Once you start using labels like that as weapons, it's impossible to actually talk about complex issues.
And it makes you think about how our own backgrounds shape how we see these politicians.
Mhm.
Like Maldonado calling Trump a fighter, as if that makes everything okay. But when does being a fighter become something dangerous?
The big question, right, like what one person sees as strong leadership, someone else sees as authoritarianism. All about perspective.
That's so true. This whole thing's been eye-opening for me. Like,
Mhm.
we dug up so much from what seemed like a simple news story.
Totally. Politics isn't just about policies, it's about how we talk about things, the stories we tell, and how we defend them.
Absolutely. And figuring out how to have these conversations, like actually engaging in good faith, that feels more important than ever.
Totally agree.
Well, on that note, I think we've done some real deep diving today. Thanks for being here.
Anytime, keep asking the tough questions.
And you know what else got to me about all this?
Hmm.
These labels we throw around like fascist, such a loaded word.
For sure.
But what does it even really mean? Are we using these words because we've thought about them or just to shut down the conversation?
It's dangerous, right? Once you start using labels like that as weapons, it's impossible to actually talk about complex issues.
And it makes you think about how our own backgrounds shape how we see these politicians like Maldonado calling Trump a fighter, as if that makes everything okay. But when does being a fighter become something dangerous?
The big question, right? Like what one person sees as strong leadership, someone else sees as authoritarianism. It's all about perspective.
That's so true. This whole thing's been eye-opening for me. Like, we dug up so much from what seemed like a simple news story.
Totally. Politics isn't just about policies. It's about how we talk about things, the stories we tell, and how we defend them.
Absolutely. And figuring out how to have these conversations, like actually engaging in good faith, that feels more important than ever.
Totally agree.
Well, on that note, I think we've done some real deep diving today. Thanks for being here.
Anytime. Keep asking the tough questions.